This is the third module that you might choose to use when you're trying to characterize an unknown gas. You've already done your signs and symptoms, and you've already done your initial recce with all your detectors. Now you're coming to use the pull tubes. This is very, very similar to the unknown liquids protocol with the pull tubes, which is step 5 in the unknown liquids. The only difference is with the liquids, you can take a sample and work on it in a safe part of the hot zone. With the unknown gases, you probably have to be in the hot zone in PPE, and that's a difficult task for the entry team. There's no way around it. So hopefully they've done training before that, so they're familiar with all the tubes and all the pumps. The standard disclaimer: don't do this at home. Don't do this unless you've got all the safety procedures in place, you've been trained in all this, and you know how to use these pumps and pull tubes. In the hot zone, wearing level A, trying to fumble your way through using a pull tube is not the right way to do it. You have to have been briefed before you go in, and you have to have trained with this back at the fire hall when things are stable and under control. The first page are your gas tech, polytech tubes. These are qualitative tests. By qualitative, we mean we're not getting a number. It's not telling you parts per million. It's more of a reading the tea leaves kind of thing. If it turns brown, then it might be this or this or this. Whereas if the tube turns pink, then it might go off in this other direction. And you have to read the instructions in order to interpret the color changes in your Polytech 1 and your Polytech 2, Polytech 3, and Polytech 4 tubes. The next 2 pages take you through and allow you to record the results from your Draeger simulant tests. There are 3 simulant test kits, and then there's the Clan Lab kit as well. If you do one, you might as well do them all, and you've got to write down your results. After that, you're doing your quantitative tubes. This last step with the quantitative pull tubes is a shotgun approach. You're just going to pull every single last tube that you have, and hopefully you get a hit. If you do get a hit on a pull tube, say it's the chlorine pull tube, well, maybe it's chlorine that you're dealing with and somehow didn't pick it up before, or it's something that's cross-reactive with that chlorine pull tube. Your chlorine detector, which you did back in step 2, has got cross-sensitivities. It's a different chemistry in the tube, so maybe a different chemical will give you a cross-sensitivity. That final step, the quantitative pull tubes, is divided into 2 sheets. The first are the fairly simple pull tubes. You just break off the ends, you do the right number of pulls using your pump, and you read the number. The second page are the more complicated pull tubes where you have to do things for sure in the right order, and we'll go into that a little bit more in detail. Now, as I said, some pull tubes are fairly straightforward and some are pretty complicated, and you won't know which it is or how to use it until you look at the documentation. Before you pull a pull tube, you've got to look at the documentation that comes with that tube. Now, every one of these cases full of pull tubes, in addition to the pull tubes, has also got an instruction form on the inside. That's where your instructions are. If you lose that, well, a while ago we went and we took all these, we expanded them, we photocopied them and laminated them and put them into this particular binder, the pull tube reference book binder. That's another option for you. You've lost this, you've lost this and you've lost this. Well, you can look in your Draeger pull tube book. Not only does this give you rough instructions, but it also shows you the color changes that you can expect on the pages. This is really useful because sometimes it's not real obvious where on the tube where on the pull tube the color change should occur. This book will show you a photo of where and what kind of color change you'll expect for a positive hit. You've lost this, you've lost this, you've lost this. There's still the internet. And there's also some photocopies in the reference section of this document. So hopefully between one of those 5 sources, you should be able to get the instructions for the given tube. I could sit and talk to you all day about what these different pull tubes do, but you'd never remember it. Therefore, we've put some documentation of how to use the tubes in the sheets. I've told you to go check the references, but the most important thing you can do is actually train with the pull tubes. Pull tubes all expire. They all have a date on them, the best before date. And after we're done with, after the date has come, we don't throw them out. We put them in a box. And then you can go and take the actual pumps out and you can see if you can get a reading. See if you can get a natural gas reading above the stove. See if you can get a reading on with your gas tech qualitative tubes above a can of muriatic acid or a bottle of muriatic acid. See if you can get a reading for an acid gas. Become familiar with it by using them as much as possible, the expired tubes. I'm just going to conclude this section on pull tubes, both the qualitative and the quantitative pull tubes, by going through a few of the quirks of the individual tubes. The gas tech tubes. There are 4 of them, gas tech 1, 2, 3, 4. They check for different things. For example, this is a gas tech 3. It tests for ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and hydrocarbons. An easy mistake is to try using this pull tube, which is a gas tech tube, with your Draeger pump. I've done it, it doesn't work. You have to use the gas tech tube with the proprietary gas tech pump, which comes with a tip breaker, and you put it in. Which way do you put it in? Well, they have an arrow on them. The arrow indicates the direction of flow. Both ends are broken off. The other thing you can screw up with here is when you take a look at the pump, you can either set it to 50 milliliters per draw or 100 milliliters per draw. Check the documentation. As I recall, they're all 100 milliliters, and it's either 1 or 3 pulls, but I've got a bad memory. I've been choked unconscious too many times. I don't want to discourage you from looking at the documentation, but if you're there and you've forgotten how many times to pull air through the tube with your pump, almost all the pull tubes that I've ever seen have got a little number on them. N equals 1, N equals 3, N equals 10. That tells you how many times you should draw air through them to get a reading. So now you've done your 4 gas tech, polytech readings. These are qualitative readings. It gives you a hint. It puts the gas into a category, if it's going to give you any reading at all. Great, we're done with that. But you still need to go further. Okay, well, you can move on to the Draeger simulant tests. There's Draeger simulant test 1, 2, 3, and the Klein Lab kit. Each of these is functionally identical in the sense that there are 5 tubes on this plastic backing, and you have to break off, they're all qualitative, so they don't give you numbers. You have to score and break off the ends on both sides. Then you put it in, arrow side first, into your 5-in-1 adapter, and then you hook that up to your pump. Now, hopefully you check your documentation. Is it 5 pulls, 10 pulls, 50 pulls? I can't remember. Check your documentation, and you pump it 50 or 10 or 5 full times until you get a reading. You can either compare the color changes to the color changes in the books, in the documentation, or a good trick is to take a new tube, or a new set of tubes that are the same but unbroken, and compare the used one to the brand new one and see where the color changes occurred. Now we've finished our qualitative tubes, our polytechs, and our Draegers, but for whatever reason, we still need more information. We still need to try and characterize this or identify it even more. It's just that important to call. Well, I got bad news. It's going to be a long day to do this properly, but here's what you do. You take every single one of your quantitative tubes. These are tubes that are designed for measuring the concentration, in parts per million typically, of a specific chemical, like chlorine, like ammonia, like halogenated hydrocarbons. And it's supposed to give you a number. You're going to take them, and when you do get a reading, you're going to have to go back and look at the documentation, figure out if you've got a cross-sensitivity happening, or if it actually is that chemical. Now most of them, or some of them, are pretty simple. You read the documentation, you break off the ends, you stick it in, arrow end first, and you pump. But some of them get pretty complicated. For example, the formaldehyde tube. I don't know if you can see it there, but it's got 2 individual tubes with a plastic widget in the middle. That's bendable. In order to use this tube properly, you have to bend that and break the ampule that's inside this tube. That's not simple. You're not going to remember how to do that if you haven't done it for a couple of years. What am I going to say? Of course, consult your documentation. Just to make life even more interesting, some tubes have to be hooked together using this little red adapter. Not only do I need to wiggle and break this ampule and wait for the right amount of time, I need to break off the ends of another tube, then hook it together, and then pump it through the pump the right number of times. Good luck figuring that out if you've never done it before. Then, if you want to get really funky, there's some tubes here with heating elements. These are for halogenated hydrocarbons. It's a common and an important class of chemicals to be able to identify, to be able to measure the concentration of. But it's not simple. I did this a little while ago, and I would still go and look through the instructions again before doing this. So hopefully you're not dealing with a gas in the hot zone. Hopefully you're dealing with a little container of liquid that you can have some time and leisure to read this stuff and digest it and do it properly. Otherwise, I hope your training was really sharp and to the point so that this isn't a complete and utter panic when you're trying to do this for real in an A suit.